Hey, good evening, everybody. Kind of a picturesque sunset there with a lot of cirrus. And with cirrus, a lot of the times we will get halo phenomenon like you see here. I don't know how many of you noticed the halo itself right next to the sundog, but this diagram kind of shows you where it's at. So, sun off to the right of the image there and gave way to a nice sunset here, pretty characteristic here in Texas. Well, we've seen a bit of a cool down, temperatures in the 60s in our part of the country, but up to the north, seeing a little bit of a cool down, 30s and 20s starting to show up there in the Great Lakes area. And even up in Canada, you can see single digits across much of Ontario and Minnesota there. So why are we getting that kind of weather? Well, we can take a look at the 500 millibar chart. This is up at 18,000 feet, and we see northwesterly flows starting to develop again. And this has been kind of a very persistent pattern since January. So we're seeing the jet stream coming from central British Columbia down through the Dakotas, maybe a little bit further. Yeah, that's about right. Through the Dakotas into Ohio. And then we pick up another circulation further south, and that's going to be the subtropical jet. And we haven't talked much about the subtropical jet, but I'll show you a new chart here. This is the hemispheric pattern. Let me back this up a little bit and get it centered here. I wonder if I can back that up even more. Let's try that. Okay, we'll set it on tonight's image. So this is going to be North America right in here. Asia is up at the top of the screen. And the big thing that we see is kind of a circle going around the hemisphere, especially up in Asia. And I'll draw that out right there. That's going to be the subtropical jet. And you can see it's a very prominent pattern on the charts, maybe even more so than the polar front jet. But we don't see it very well developed in our part of the country down here. Maybe this little segment here across Texas and Georgia and Florida. But up across Asia, it's very well developed, especially off the coast of Japan. And during World War II, when the B-29s would go from Guam into Tokyo and Japan itself, they would encounter this subtropical jet, and that's kind of how the strong jet stream winds were discovered back then. Embedded within that, you can see the polar front jet looking like this right there. So a lot of waves there. We're seeing probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 long waves, so that's going to be kind of a progressive pattern. I do see a little bit of a block out here, but normally when we have 5 waves, we tend to see the whole pattern shift eastward over time. So that's kind of the pattern here. I'm taking a look at chat, making sure the audio is good. And I see, let's see, we got Mark checking in. Sue M is here. Alexi and Kevin McKinney's here. Michael Burrell mentioning a record high in Atlanta for the month of February. Well, I might have to go back to that map and look at that. Fun with Tech is here. And let's see. Got 57 for a high in Atlanta. Is that right? Oh, for the month of February. Okay, so yeah, very hot February. But at least they've cooled down a little bit there. Okay, let's check out the infrared imagery. And we can see a little bit of that subtropical jet cloud cover moving across Texas, and that's what's given us our halo phenomenon. A little bit of lift and moisture in that part of the jet segment. And up to the north, our polar front jet is going to be way up at the top of the chart, but things look pretty fair across much of the country this evening. A little bit of a storm system moving into the Pacific Northwest, and we'll be taking a look at that shortly. We'll look at the thermal field here real quick and see what's going on temperature-wise. So we're going to bring the front on the warm side of this thickness gradient. And then we'll find our warm front on the outer banks of Newfoundland way up there. In behind it, a very strong cold air advection pattern across the eastern half of the U.S. And then on the other side, warm air advection pattern setting up in Canada with some downslope flow from the Canadian Rockies there. Don't have a very strong thermal gradient across California and New Mexico, or California and Old Mexico. It looks like that's concentrated way up in Alaska. So I'm going to draw the front coming onto the British Columbia coast, maybe something like that. And then maybe a warm front coming off the Canadian Rockies like that. So the patterns are pretty far north, but the storm track is running kind of like this. Now, one other important area that we look at this time of year, getting into March, is Bangladesh and India. We haven't looked at this at all lately. You can see things look pretty quiet. We don't have the monsoon pattern set up yet. That's well to the south. So things are pretty dry in India, very warm, but we're watching for tornado season to get started in Bangladesh. And let me show you where Bangladesh is. We'll add the county lines, and you can see it right here. And as you know, I don't know how many of you have read WeatherWise about 3 years ago, but I helped out with a chase intercept out in that area and wrote an article on that. And it is kind of a challenging area, but March is usually when they get the severe weather from mid-March into early April. So let's take a look at the surface chart and see what's going on there. This is going to be 0Z data, so we're talking about 9 in the morning. And you see some very warm dew points, 72 along the coast, 72 around here, 68 at Dhaka, and we do get dry lines out there, believe it or not. It looks like it's not very well developed, though, because I can see lots of 50s and, yeah, pretty much just 50s all the way inland. So the patterns are really not coming together right now, just kind of a hazy, high-pressure pattern right now. But we're going to be following this quite a bit as we get into the rest of March. And let me show you this one other chart so we know what to expect. This is going to be a 500 millibar chart. And you can see the flow is pretty flat. A little bit of a subtropical jet running across here. Our next outbreak of severe weather, if we have enough reduction in the capping and enough moisture, that's probably going to come maybe right here. See those waves coming through? That's going to be March 7th. So we'll watch for that. And then maybe another shot around March 12th. But really what we need is northwesterly flow to get the curving of the hodograph. These southwesterly flow events are not very conducive to severe weather, so we may be a couple weeks off still. So anyway, that's what's going on in Bangladesh, and we'll keep track of that even when we don't have severe weather here in the U.S. Okay, let's get back on track and look at the weather in the U.S. And we'll take a look at our dynamics here. This is going to be tonight's chart right here. And remember, if we drop the jet in this channeled area with cyclonic, very dark red flow to the left side and anticyclonic neutral color to the right side, that's going to outline the position of the jet stream. Now the subtropical jet is not going to show up as much because this is a 500 millibar chart. The subtropical jet is found way up at 250 and 200 millibars, sometimes at 300, but mostly above that. So this is going to be good mostly for finding the polar front jet. And this is pretty much showing the northwesterly flow and the ridging across the Canadian Rockies right there. And that ridging is there because of the warm front that we showed you moving off the mountains, warm air advection. So these patterns all kind of link together, the ridge and the warm air advection in the low levels. A little bit of troughing off the California coast, so we'll keep an eye on that for the GFS chart there. Actually, we're going to run this forward, so we'll see what that does on the NAM. Or, yeah, this is the GFS. Okay, so looks like we do shear off a little bit of a low pressure system right there on Saturday, getting into the weekend already. And looks like that ejects northeast into Texas on Saturday. See that trough right there? And that'll be mostly out of the picture by Sunday. And then we get this other wave digging southeastward from the Pacific on Sunday going into Monday into California. So that'll be the next weather system coming into the U.S. And that'll move across the Rockies and into the Midwest on Tuesday and Wednesday. Then we should see things moderate across the country for the rest of the week. And then a couple waves moving across the northern half of the U.S. on Monday the 13th here. So it looks pretty quiet. I don't see much in the way of severe weather for the next week or so in the southern plains, but we'll keep an eye on things in the central and north. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, I was going to take a look at the soundings real quick. I figured with things being quiet, this would be a good time to review maybe 5 or 10 soundings and get familiar with those, since we're getting into storm season. So now that we have a good idea of the setup across the country, we'll take a look at Fort Worth. And we know they're back behind the cold front, high pressure moving into that area. And there's what the sounding looks like at Fort Worth about an hour ago. So very warm and, well, not very warm, but kind of mild in the lower levels. Very steep lapse rates, up to about 850 millibars. So this is indicating cold air just off the surface, but lots of modification going on. So cold over warm situation there. And you can see a little bit of what looks like a little bit of a cap there at 700 millibars. So if we had more moisture, that would be a factor right there. But the column is very dry. The moisture line lying well to the left side of the chart. And the spread between temperature and dew point indicates very dry relative humidities. Okay, we got a lot of viewers up in Indiana, so we'll take a look at Wilmington, Ohio, and check that out. And we see a rather cold sounding there. And the sounding is dry because it's kind of a cold air mass, but relative humidities are kind of high. So we're supporting some cloud layers maybe here and in here. So base is about maybe 4,000, and then more bases at about 12,000 here. So maybe some altostratus with some stratocu. And this is pretty characteristic of cold air coming down from Canada. You see the very steep lapse rates, so there's air mass modification going on there. And the low tropopause because of the fresh polar air mass moving out of Canada there. Okay, let me switch back to chat and just see if there's anything else going on here. We have GeoNerd. It's a name I haven't seen recently, from Tucson. And Sue M mentions an annual Skywarn training seminar. And may miss the webcast. Well, we will be here over the weekend, so no problem there. Okay, let's go up. Well, let's go way up north into Canada. Let's try Churchill, the polar bear capital of the North American continent. And we see a very dry, not very dry, but very cold profile here. with an inversion just off the surface here. So moderately cold air aloft up at about 10,000 feet with very cold air near the surface. And this is cold because of radiational cooling during the polar night hours, during the overnight hours. A lot of long-wave radiation escapes into space, cools the surface, conducts that up into the heat dissipates into the ground, and we get a lot of cooling there of the lower part of the atmosphere. And temperatures minus 30 degrees Celsius, so looks like we finally cooled down a bit up north after that warm wave that we had a couple weeks ago. And we'll try Fort Nelson up in northeastern British Columbia. Again, an Arctic air mass inversion right there, very cold near the ground, and almost up to freezing at about 4,000 or 5,000 feet. So kind of what I'm showing you is a little bit of pattern recognition using soundings. So you know how to interpret these when you pull up a chart. We'll try Boise, Idaho. Kind of a dry sounding right there with some upper level moisture. Looks like some cirrus and cirrostratus up at about 20,000 feet. And just kind of a mild column there, temperatures near 50 at the surface, with a gradual drop off to very cold conditions aloft. And then we'll try one more. We'll try Tucson, Arizona. And as expected, lots of dry air there, but very warm. Temperatures near 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Very steep lapse rate. So maybe there's a little bit of air mass modification going on, maybe some Pacific air moving in with this northwesterly flow, but very strong heating at the surface working against that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the forecast and see what's coming up for the next couple weeks. Okay. I've got about 15 windows open, so I'm trying to find my charts here. There we go. Okay, here's tonight's chart. We're seeing high pressure across the central U.S. right there. So that means cold air advection for the eastern U.S. and warm air advection for the high plains and the Canadian prairies right there. And so we know that there's a stagnating polar front off the Gulf Coast well to the south, and a warm front moving through Canada off the top of the map there. So we're kind of in between systems, and let's see what we're looking at for tomorrow night's webcast. Looks like that high pressure just kind of shifts eastward into the Ohio Valley. Continued cold air advection along the east coast, but a little bit of a warm-up for Texas and the central U.S. Looks like we got a Pacific system moving inland here. See that right there? The cold front moving inland. And that's probably what we're looking at for the front right there. And you remember we saw the Boise sounding. It looked a little bit warm with 50 at the surface, and that kind of correlates very well with this area being the warm sector. The origin of this air probably from the inland areas of California and Nevada. Okay, so moving forward into Saturday, looks like a little bit of a disturbance moving through Texas. We saw that yesterday on the webcast. See that down there? So it looks like a little bit of clouds and rainy weather for central and southern Texas, but very strong surge of moisture and warm air moving up to the plains over the weekend. So we may see some showers with that. And now we start to see the next system starting to move into the Rockies. You see the banding of these thickness lines, the red and the blue. That's the system crossing the Rockies. So we're probably looking at maybe something like this with a system coming across the Four Corners area. There's the warm front. Okay. And you can see this little wave right here in Arizona. So that's probably, there's probably a little bit of a closed low there, another closed low up in the South Dakota area. And let's move forward into Monday. System emerges into the central plains, looking like that. Maybe a bit of a dry line becoming active in Texas. And then for Wednesday, looks like that clears Texas pretty quickly. Okay, so for the rest of the week, Thursday into Friday, a little bit of an Alberta Clipper moving probably east-southeast across the northern plains. That'll be heading for the Chicago area. And there it goes, bringing a front southward through Illinois and Iowa. This is Thursday afternoon here next week. And on the tail end, looks like another Pacific system coming in through the Seattle area. There comes the next system right there on Friday. Pretty quiet for Texas, just southwesterly flow. And then we get this polar air mass start to take hold here. And that's going to push the polar front down to this area here next weekend on the 11th. So what happens with that? Looks like it just kind of shifts southward on Sunday. Kind of a backdoor front into Texas, and see that banding right there of the thickness gradient. That's going to be the tail end of that front right there coming through California. Okay, so for Monday the 13th, now you see an upper level system pick up that boundary in California, and there it goes, off to the races there in Arizona and Utah. And in Texas, the other part of the front kind of sitting in central Texas, and that's a ripe area for isentropic lift as we get southerly flow developing in advance of this system right here. So we'll watch for rain starting to break out in Texas on the 14th, and then we get to the end of the GFS run. And there on the 16th, looks like lots of rain for the southeastern U.S., and again, this is 324 hours out, so a lot could change between now and then. Okay, Ryan Thomas is checking in from South Florida. I appreciate the comments there. Sarah Wood got home from Amateur Radio Club meeting there. Excellent. And snow next weekend for Indiana. Well, I'll take a quick look and see what we got going on there. But yeah, look at that. Talking about the 12th and 13th. This is 228 hours out, but we were talking about that big air mass shifting south, and looks like we've got a couple waves moving along the leading edge of that air mass right there. So yeah, looks like Indiana and Ohio will be in a favorable area. So we'll watch that over the next few days and see what the models do, and maybe we'll look at the ECMWF and see what that shows. Okay, I think that's probably about it for tonight. Anyway, I appreciate you all watching. Ryan's asking about severe weather setups like we witnessed on 228. That'll probably be a while. We got kind of a quiet pattern, but it's probably going to be another week or so, I think, before we have anything like that. Anyway, thanks all you for watching, and we'll see y'all tomorrow.